I work for IBM and we have to carry one.
Right.
How about that? So,
How about that? That's the idea.
yeah. And we sell them in the bookstore here for our up-and-coming inventors, you know?
You know, I'm going to buy some. I'll give you a poll.
There you go. Good
That's
idea.
the best thing.
This
He
is-
loves things like that.
This is one of the very few things we have that actually belonged to Thomas Edison. This was his eyepiece, his jeweler's
yeah,
little board.
jeweler's, right.
Yeah, it's a little magnifier for
Yeah, I
small.
got one at home. Somebody gave it to me, the old
Yeah.
one.
And so we put this in this box because we don't want anybody to touch it. 'Cause
Yeah.
Edison was the last one to use it. And so there still may be a little of his DNA around the edge.
Could be.
And if you've seen that movie Jurassic Park, we might want to bring him back someday.
Right, who knows? Yep, that's how things are.
All right, we're going to go in the back now. This is a great chart, though, to see. You can take a picture of this. That in Edison's lifetime, these were all his years of his inventions. He had 1,093 patents, American patents.
American patents.
1,250 foreign patents, and still holds the record of any single man.
Inventions.
Yep. And this little spot here is where he was here from 1876 to 1883. This 6.5-year period here. He had a spike of 400. So he had 400 that came out of this laboratory, and he had 700 for the entire rest of his life. Wow. So that's what he was.
That's a lot. And these are some of them.
This is 20 of these 400.
20 of these 400 inventions.
Yep. And it's, you know, it's the light bulb and the,
Oh yeah, the light
the
bulbs.
phonograph.
Oh, I always like associate it with the light bulb.
Yeah, yeah.
Hello. Hi, how you doing?
See, one thing nice about this new camera, you can always do it like this. You're in it, I don't have to worry about it. It's very nice.
People join us here.
Yeah,
They join us.
they can join us.
Oh, there? Hello. Hello.
My friend got one like this.
Yeah, okay. We're gonna go through those. All right, come on back here. The front half of the museum, we talk about Edison's younger days, and this part is when he actually came here to Menlo Park. Okay, and then of course I repeat this back. My wife says I do this in my sleep. Okay, first of all, I'd like to show you this photograph and this model. See this model? That is a model of the laboratory that was outside where the tower is now. Okay, and oh, we have some more people coming in here. Let me hold up so I don't have to repeat this 14 times. Just see if they join us. Maybe they're not going to do this. Okay, so if I can have your attention, right? So this is a model of the laboratory that was outside where the tower is now. This is where he operated. And this model was given to Thomas Edison. Come in here, you can take a picture of this. Thomas Edison and his second wife, Minor Miller, in 1922. It was given to them in New York City. But the significance of this model is the model was made from the scraps of wood from the original building. Oh, there you go.
That's nice.
That's about all we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been training on
Okay.
So somebody.
Very, very important.
Yeah, very important.
You know, that's the centerpiece of the whole museum. All the buildings are gone because it's well over 100 years. The neighbors knew he moved away, and they started ripping the boards off and put it in the furnace. You know, it's a shame, but that's what happened to.
So they
all
didn't
history.
use the McDonald's sticks to stir coffee, right?
No. But Henry Ford, who's his good friend, was building a museum out in Michigan. And he came here thinking he was going to pick up all the old buildings, and he got here. He was surprised. There were no buildings then. They had already destroyed everything. So what he did was he heard that the brick, he had an office, was made of bricks, and a building was made out of, the machine shop was also made out of bricks. They were both gone. He said, well, what happened to this? Well, the neighbors blew them up, and they reused the bricks and made, they made the steps and chimneys and fireplaces and all that. So Henry Ford, he couldn't believe that. So he walked around the neighborhood. He said, you wouldn't happen to have any bricks that came out of Edison's? Yeah, I put them in this fireplace. And he had somebody come back in and rebuild the fireplace, but took out the bricks, the original
bricks.
And he brought those bricks out to Michigan.
So he wants the real bricks.
He wants the real thing. So he did as much of that as possible and rebuilt the same area out there in Michigan. He did such a phenomenal job that he recreated it from photographs and everything. But he had them come here and scrape off the top layer of dirt off the site. And he took 7 train carloads of dirt, New Jersey dirt, off the top of this, put it on the train down below, brought it out to Michigan, and before he recreated his little village, they spread 1 inch of New Jersey dirt on that spot to make it as authentic as possible. And then they even built the buildings so that they aligned with where the sun would come up in New Jersey and where the sun would come up in Michigan. Trying to make it as exact as possible. And as the story goes, we don't know how true the story is, but the story was on opening day for the museum out there, Edison was picked up by Henry Ford on the train. And he drove him around, and everybody upstairs, the buildings, this was the building. Upstairs was the President of the United States. Madame Curie came in from Europe. The Rockefellers, anybody that was anybody was upstairs waiting for him. And so Edison was picked up by Ford. They drove right to the front, and he went inside, and he saw the bottles on the wall, just the way he had left it, from photographs. And he was really amazed, but I mean, he was looking around showing Edison, and Edison didn't say a word. And typically he was a jokester. He always had something funny to say, but he didn't have a thing to say after seeing all the buildings. And well, he finally got upstairs in front of the president. He said, "Well, Mr. Edison, you didn't say anything. What do you think of my recreation?" He says, "Nah, it's not the same. It's not. What's wrong with it?" He says, "It's too clean." So he was a jokester after all. So that was the story on being out in Michigan. Okay, so you saw that. I want to show you something over here before we go into the phonograph. So this was a very early phonograph. Not the first one. I have the first one over there. This was the very early, but it's easy to point out a few things. This big bronze, brass, whatever it is, a drum, is called the drum, for obvious reasons. Wrapped around the drum, which looks like aluminum foil, is really tin foil. The original phonographs were called tin foil phonographs. It was a little thicker, a little bit more durable.
Is that before the wax ones?
Oh yeah, this one here is actually wax. Okay. And thirdly, this thing here in the front, that black thing, is called the diaphragm. The diaphragm was both the microphone and the playback all in one. Okay? Now that you've seen that, now we can talk about this. Come on over here so you can see right in front of you. So Edison moves into his brand new building, that building out there, the model. He moves into it, and it's all empty, it's got all his men are ready to work, and he's thinking, what am I going to work on first? Now, when he was a young boy, he learned Morse code and worked for Western Union and so forth as a telegraph operator. So he always wanted to record Morse code so that he could record it at some high speed and then play it back at some slow speed so that some poor operator could copy the code without it being so fast. So he took something that looked like a CD, of course it wasn't, and he took something with a sharp needle and scratched in a dot and a dash and a dot and a dash, scratching it onto the CD. And accidentally, the needle slipped and went zip, and he heard that sound. He said, "Whoa, what's that sound?" And all of a sudden, he figured it out. And he grabbed the diagram. He grabbed a piece of paper and drew this diagram. And he took the diagram, he handed it over to Mr. Cruci, and he said, "Mr. Cruci, build me one of these." Now, Mr. Cruci was from Switzerland. He was a fine machinist. He could make anything. And he worked in this machine shop. This is a picture from the machine shop.
That's the machine shop.
That is the machine shop. And it was right here on this line. Okay? And Mr. Cruci looked at the diagram. He said, "Well, what the heck is it?" He says, "It's my talking machine." Oh, when he said that, all the guys stopped. Like, what? Talking machine? This was the 1800s. Machines didn't talk.
Don't talk.
Not like today. Everything talks today, right? So he said, all right. So Mr. Cruci takes the diagram and he goes into the machine shop. And 3 days later, he comes back with this. And everybody said, "That's it? That's the talking machine?" "Yep, that's it." Well, they all wanted to hear it talk, wouldn't you, if you worked there? So he says, all right, go get me a piece of that tin foil. So he got the tin foil and he wrapped it around that drum. And then this thing in the front, I called it the diaphragm. Now what that is in the round circle, there was a very thin piece of material in the back. When I speak, the vibrations from my throat move the air between me and you, it vibrates your eardrum, and that's how you hear me. Well, by the same token, when I speak, it would vibrate this diaphragm to vibrate with my voice. So he took a needle, stuck the needle through the center of that, so that every time I speak, the needle would vibrate with the diaphragm. He turned it around this way, put the needle up against the tin foil on the drum. He got down on his knees. He spoke into there as he cranked the handle. He said, Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. And anywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
Yeah.
And everybody was looking at her real strange, you know? And he moves this thing back to the beginning. And he starts cranking the handle. And all of a sudden, the machine says, Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white. Wow, they couldn't believe what they had just heard. This was the first time the human voice had ever been recorded and played back. Right outside where that tower is now, that's the spot that it happened. Wow, they looked at each other, they couldn't believe it. Well, his first thought was, this baby's going to get me into my retirement. He knew he was going to make money with it. But then he started to second guess himself. Who's going to spend money to say Mary had a little lamb? I mean, it's just not that important, you know? So he got a patent on it. And he showed it around, he took it all over, everybody was really impressed with it. In fact, there was a newspaper in New York, they had a front page, they called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. Anybody who can make a machine that talks has to be a wizard. So he was the wizard. Anyway, so he is just about ready to put this aside because he had other things to work on. He's pushing this thing aside, and all of a sudden, a young boy comes to the door and says, Mr. Edison, today's my first day on the job as a newspaper reporter, and I would like to interview you. Well, normally he would say, no, you need an appointment, but the kid was 15 years old, so he said, okay. So the kid comes in, and he says, Mr. Edison, can I ask you this? Why did you say Mary had a little lamb in the very first recording? Edison said, well, had I known it was going to work the first time, I would have said something more important. But he didn't know, right? Yeah, all right. Anyway, so he pushes this thing aside and never touches it again for 10 years. Ooh. Other people were working on it, improving it and everything else, like you said, with the wax and all that. That was an improvement. And he would get royalties for this, or for everything had to do with his phonograph. But he didn't have anything to do with it himself. So he pushed that aside and went to work on his next creation, which was the light bulb. And we're very careful to say here that Edison did not invent the light bulb. He perfected the light bulb. It was a big difference. And so Edison, before Edison was born, people were making bulbs like this. You know, glass bulbs. And they were putting filaments inside, just like that filament is lit there, just like that. But the problem was they wouldn't stay lit for more than a couple of seconds and burn out, burn out, burn out. So when Edison started, he thought, oh, they just didn't know what they were doing. Wow. He found out after trying 10,000 different filaments. Imagine the persistence of anybody going that many. 10,000. He says, there's got to be more to it than this. Something I'm overlooking. He thought about it and figured it out. What he had a glass blower here that was here from Germany. And he had him blow this glass. He says, but I want you to make me a new glass bulb. But this time, I want you to have a straw sticking out of the top of it. He said, okay. So he made the bulb, they put the filament inside, and at the very top of the straw, he put a pump to suck the air out of the bulb. Because his thought was that inside the bulb was this air that we breathe. And part of the air that we breathe is 20% oxygen, is what we breathe every day. And he felt that that oxygen supports the burning and causing it to burn out. And he was absolutely right. So by putting that pump on the top to suck the air out of it, he created a vacuum inside. When he couldn't get any more air out of it, he lit up a torch, and at the end of the glass, and right at the top of the bulb, he hit that with the torch. When it turned white hot, he twisted that and sealed the vacuum in. And that's what that little tip is on the top of all the old bulbs. That's where he actually sealed it. And now he comes over and he connects it to his battery. And instead of it lasting for just 2 seconds, this time it lasted for 14 and a half hours. And he went, yes, I got it. That was the secret, the vacuum. So yes, the filament was very important, but the vacuum was the most important thing. So he said, we're not going to say a thing about this to anybody until it's fully perfected, that we can repeat this. Anybody could do it once, you know. So it took them 2 months from the end of October of 1879 to the end of December of 1879. When he was satisfied, he put an ad in a New York paper saying that Edison had perfected the light bulb, and anyone wishing to see it is welcome to come here to Menlo Park on New Year's Eve at 11:30 at night. So he told his men, you sort of missed this, but he had a shed out in the backyard with kerosene lamps in it that he used to make carbon with from the soot that accumulated in the top. So he told his men, go to the shed, get the kerosene lamps, go out to Christie Street, walk all the way down to the train. Did you see the train down below, the train tracks? Well, there's a set of train tracks that's still there. That was called the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time. He says, go down there and wait and see if anybody shows up from New York. So they go down there, and sure enough, the train pulls in at 11:30 at night, stops right there. There's no station, it just stops in the middle of nowhere. And their men are waiting there with the kerosene lamps, and all of a sudden the doors open. 3,000 people got off the train that wanted to see the light bulb. Wow, so they're walking the people up the street with the kerosene lamps, you know. And right about here, this was the edge of the machine shop, right here. Right about here, there was a pathway from the street, and 3,000 people assembled right on the spot where you are. And just before midnight, he had this generator in the front end of this machine shop, and it was being turned by a steam engine. And he just before midnight, he walked over to it, and he went like this. And not one bulb, but 100 bulbs came on, every window, every doorway. It was like a miniature city. It was unbelievable. They expected to see a little bulb. They didn't expect to see this. It was unbelievable. Yep. And so, they were so thrilled that people were touching the bulb and finding it was hot, you know. They didn't know what to expect. So it was unbelievable. So anyway, it was now about an hour later. It was a cold winter night, and they started to leave. And as they walked out to Christie Street and they started to walk down towards the train, they realized that Edison had installed street lights all the way down the street, right up to the train. This was the first street in the entire world to have electric lights on it, incandescent lights on it. So, anyway, by the way, the name of the street is Christie Street, but it has nothing to do with the name of our present governor. He gets no credit for this whatsoever.
No, Governor Christie.
Okay. All right, so that's the story on that. The next, now remember, he was only here on this site for 6.5 years. But all these stories, they happen one on top of the other. You know, one didn't stop and the other started. So anyway, here's this picture of, there's a picture of a piece of track that he thought to himself, why can't trains run on electricity? And so what did he do? He had them build a test track from across the street. There's a billboard. Right at that billboard, they built a 2.5-mile test track into the next town that will touch it. And then he built himself a train. The cover picture there is of the train. And he took this generator and the 2 wires, the plus and the minus, which was in the front of the building, which was right here. They dug a hole underneath the street. They attached the plus to one side of the track and the minus to the other side of the track. When he put that train on the track and the 2 steel wheels touched the track, when this steel wheel touched the plus and that one touched the minus, the train moved forward. When they got to the end, they would pull the stick back, reverse the polarity on the wheels, and the train would back up. But to prove that this thing could move people, he loaded 98 people on the train, got it up to 45 miles an hour using that generator. All right? It was an experiment just to see if it would work. Of course, today, all trains are electric, one way or the other, whether you got wires over the top of your head, or like in New York, we have the 3rd rail for the subway. You know, even if it's a diesel train, it's a diesel engine that's turning a generator, creating electricity that goes to the wheels. So everything is electric today, because of Thomas Edison. Okay? All right. So the next story I want to tell you about is here. It's about the telephone. Does anybody remember who invented the telephone? Graham Bell. Oh, I always forget that. Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell got a patent for the first telephone, but it didn't work very well. You would scream into microphone. I just barely hear it at the other end. It just wasn't very good. We're blowing up him just to get the patent, but that's about it. So about a year after he got the patent, he comes down here to see Thomas Edison. They knew each other. They both worked as telegraph operators up in Boston. So he comes down here and he says, you know, I got the patent for the telephone, but he says, it doesn't work very well. He says, yes, I heard that. He says, but I have just what you need. He says, I invented this, the carbon button microphone. This was a very sensitive microphone. And this, you know, I said the word carbon, the carbon button. You know where the carbon came from? That shed in the back with all those kerosene lamps. He scraped that out, and that's the kerosene. That's the carbon that's in the top, in the glass top. So in there is the carbon, and he makes this very sensitive microphone. He takes this microphone, connects it to Bell's telephone, and now you know we can speak anywhere in the world because of this. And now, no matter where you've come from, no matter where you are, if you're over a certain age, this was in the mouthpiece of your telephone, no matter what country you came from, right? Mm-hmm. In the Philippines, no matter where, all over the world.
All sounds. Yeah.
This, they sold billions and billions and billions of these from 1879 to 1979, 100 years. That was in every phone, every place in the world. Imagine that. What can you buy today that lasts 100 years? You buy a computer, 3 months later you got to throw it out and buy another one, right? And by the way, this was sort of an ongoing feud between Bell and Edison about the telephone. Mm. So you know how Bell used to answer his telephone when it rang? He used to say, "Ahoy!" as if he was on a ship. Edison didn't like that. He came up with his own word. Hello.
Oh, he was the one who started.
He's the one that started it.
Hello.
Yeah. And so, so they argued over this for years. Hello, ahoy, hello, ahoy, you know. Mm-hmm. Well, it happened that poor Bell died first. And that's why we say hello. That's the way it works. Anyway, so that's the story on the telephone. Mm-hmm. The next part of the story is, I already told this part in the front, is that his young wife passed away. They were only married a short time, but she passed away. And he moved out of New Jersey, out of here. He moved his kids to New York City and got himself a nanny to take care of the kids. Some of his friends thought he shouldn't be alone, he should be a married man. And so they started inviting him up to Boston, and they promenaded these beautiful women past him, like debutantes of the day. And one of them struck his fancy. Her name is Mina Miller, and she's the lady that's in that photograph many, many years later. But they wound up getting married. Within 2 years, they were each remarried. And he asked her, where would you like to live? Would you like to go back to Menlo Park? Well, she didn't want to have anything to do with this. The first wife was here, didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now this lady, she came from wealth, some sort of wealth. Her father, too, was an inventor, not quite as famous as Thomas Edison, but he made farm equipment and stuff. And she was college educated, so she was quite a gal. I mean, he only had 3 months of training of schooling in his whole life. But anyway, so she complimented, when they finally got married, she really complimented him, in every way. She helped him in every way possible. Anyway, so they got married, and he buys a house for her up in West Orange, New Jersey. You familiar with West Orange? The second half of his life. Okay, so he was here for 6.5 years, and he spent the next 45 years up in West Orange, which is the rest of his life. He died there in that house, and is buried in the backyard. He moves up to that building, to the house. It happened to be a mansion. It was a mansion from the day. It had like 8 bedrooms. It was beautiful. In fact, it came fully furnished with furniture from all over Europe, and Persian rugs, and paintings from the masters and Edison's. And he bought it as a repossession from the bank. And he said, well, why does the bank have a house like this? Nah, they said the owner couldn't pay the mortgage anymore. Oh, really? What did the owner do? He said, he used to be a bookkeeper. He said, how does a bookkeeper afford a house like this? He was getting in trouble because he was embezzling his employer. That's how he bought all this great stuff. Well, Edison wound up buying the whole place for $175,000. which doesn't sound like much today, but that's about $4.5 million.
$4.5 million.
Yeah, in today's money. But he had it and he bought it. And that house is still there, and you can go on a tour of that. It's a fabulous tour. And right down the street, a piece of property became available, and he bought it. And I think it was 19 acres. And it was on that 19 acres he built his next laboratory. And you could go there and go on a tour of that. So anyway, so the next part of the story is once he gets into the next laboratory up in West Orange, he starts thinking to himself, what am I going to work on first? When he first moved into this building over here, remember he said, what am I going to work on first? He worked on that Morse code thing, which led him to the phonograph. Well, he thought to himself, he says, what am I going to work on first in my new laboratory? And he thought about it and thought about it, and all of a sudden he says, hey, it's been 10 years since I worked on my own phonograph. Everybody else has had an awful lot of fun with it, and I would like to start working on it again. So sure enough, he decides that's what he's going to do. So he goes to work in 1898. This was the first phonograph to come out of his new laboratory. And I'm going to play this for you. It's 115 years old. The recording on here is 115 years old. And now, after all these many years, what you said about the wax, that was the big advancement in this from the original. Now, the original was made with the tin foil, and 10 years later, now the state of the art was this wax cylinder. And the wax cylinder was, of course, hello ladies, the wax cylinder replaced the original tin foil. But you'll never guess who invented the blue wax cylinder that we talk about. Alexander Graham Bell, his competitor, right? So, just as he recorded on that tin foil originally, well, the tin foil, you're only able to record on it once or twice and play it back once or twice, because the needle actually cut into the tin foil and it actually destroyed it. So after just one or two plays, it was destroyed. And so when Bell came up with this was a big improvement. Now, Bell did this because Bell and his family was very much into the hard of hearing, and they knew this made it louder and better. So anyway, so he created this. So I'm about to play this for you. Anybody's got video, now's the time to pull out the cameras, audio, video, whatever you want. I used to do this, and when I get all done, everybody would pull out the cameras. I had to do it again. Now I tell you in advance. All right, got it? Ready? Okay.
Ready.
So this is a 115-year-old phonograph. It's strictly a wind-up machine. There's no electricity. This horn focuses the sound, makes it sound louder, even though it's not really any louder. So I release the spring, which makes this thing turn. This is the diaphragm that we keep talking about. Underneath there is a needle. When I put the needle down, right about here.
So he tells you, yes, we have no bananas. We have no bananas today. With string beans and onions, cabbages and scallions, and all kinds of fruit and say. We have an old-fashioned tomato, a Long Island potato, but yes, we have no bananas. We have no bananas today.
So how was that for 115 years old?
That's great.
Not bad, right?
Yeah,
Well, somebody said to Thomas Edison, oh, that was great. Can I have a copy of that song about the bananas? Copy? No, we don't make copies. You see, each one was an original. And they would actually, the guy would sing in there, they put a special needle on here, and it would engrave itself onto a brand new cylinder. So he thought about it, boy, that is a good idea. And he thought about it, he figured it out. I make it sound fast, but it took him 2 years to figure it out how to do it. But he took this blue wax cylinder, and he gold plated it, made a mold out of it. And then he put hot wax inside the mold. When it cooled off, he pulled it out, and he had an exact copy of this original. And what did he do? He went into business, selling Edison gold molded records.
He liked to put his name on it.
Everything. His name was on absolutely everything. See? The gold molded records. So now if you like that song, you could just go to the corner store and buy yourself this for just 35 cents. The problem was you had to have one of these at home. This was $50. And that doesn't sound like much, but people only made 5 cents an hour back then, so that was quite an undertaking. But 35 cents, you pick it up, you take it